Good evening from Westminster, where for the very first time the House of Commons has voted in favour of a Brexit agreement. But crucially, it rejected the Prime Minister's timetable for passing the necessary legislation. The first of two votes tonight was on the Withdrawal Agreement Bill. That's the main Brexit legislation, which runs to 110 pages and turns the Prime Minister's Brexit deal into law. Well, the government won that by 329 votes to 299, a majority of 30. But it then lost the second vote on the parliamentary timetable by 14 votes because a majority of MPs did not think that 2 days was long enough to scrutinise such an important bill. The Prime Minister said that the bill would now be paused, and the EU has signalled tonight that it will accept the UK's request for another Brexit delay. Our political editor Laura Kuenssberg reports on tonight's Brexit votes.
A rare moment of silence, and then a result.
The ayes to the right, 308. The noes to the left, 322.
MPs kicked out the Prime Minister's timetable for speeding his Brexit deal through Parliament. Plenty of MPs don't want to leave, but even with those who do, the majority in here tonight thought it was happening too fast.
Tonight, the House has refused to be bounced into debating a hugely significant piece of legislation in just 2 days, with barely any notice and an analysis of the economic impact of this bill. The Prime Minister is the author of his own misfortune. So I make this offer to him tonight. Work with us, all of us, to agree a reasonable timetable, and I suspect this House will vote to debate, scrutinise and, I hope, amend the detail of this bill.
I must express my disappointment that the House has again voted for delay, rather than a timetable that would have guaranteed that the UK would be in a position to leave the EU on October the 31st with a deal. And we now face further uncertainty, and the EU must now make up their minds over how to answer Parliament's request for a delay.
The opposition parties all said no to the Prime Minister's pace.
This is yet another humiliating defeat for the Prime Minister this evening, who has sought to railroad through this House legislation that requires proper scrutiny.
The House has made a very wise decision to allow further time for detailed examination of some of the most important legislation that we will ever have to consider.
There is now more opportunity to release the economic impact assessments, which we should all have sight of before we make such material decisions.
But minutes before, MPs did give their permission for the Prime Minister's deal to move to the next stage. Miles from agreeing it overall, but a milestone nonetheless.
The ayes to the right, 329. The noes to the left, 299.
Parliament has approved tonight for the first time a version of Brexit.
The ayes to the right, 329. The noes to the left, 299.
How welcome it is, even joyful, that for the first time in this long saga, this House has actually accepted its responsibilities together, come together and embraced a deal. Yeah. We should not overlook the significance of this moment. And I pay particular tribute to those members of the House who were sceptical and who had difficulties and doubts and who decided to place the national interest ahead of any other consideration.
But what on earth happens next?
One way or another, we will leave the EU with this deal to which this House has just given its assent.
We were meant to be leaving the EU in 9 days' time. But tonight, instead, MPs are at odds with each other and scratching their heads.
This is a bad deal. It's a hard Brexit. It's not what people voted for. It bears no resemblance to the promises that were made in 2016. So at the very least, it should go back to the public.
The House of Commons is entitled to amend it. This is where the Prime Minister seems to me to be behaving so badly. And now I don't know what he's doing.
Really, what we want now is a general election, because what's clear is the Conservative Party, we are in government, but with a minus 44 majority, we're not in power.
The chief negotiator didn't really want to be drawn tonight.
Do you think there'll be an extension?
But they can't and won't just shrug it off. The President of the EU Council, Donald Tusk, has already written online tonight. He will recommend the delay the Prime Minister has had to ask for. Many MPs who sit down there hope it won't be the case. But delay could soon mean a decision for all of us. At the ballot box, an election.
And Laura's with me now outside the Palace of Westminster. So the Prime Minister gets a defeat and a victory in one evening.
That's right. I mean, even in these controversial times, two things that appear contradictory can both be true. So, on the one hand, yes, Boris Johnson failed to get the timetable through that he so desired, to get Brexit rammed through, all that legislation in record time, to stick to the deadline. He promised again and again to leave at the end of this month. That has failed, and it feels almost pretty much impossible, even for the biggest Brexiteer optimist, to imagine this could now happen in the next 9 days. But the flip side is that the government did show that they had a majority for this deal in principle to proceed through the threshold to the next stage. Now that is a million miles from approving all of this deal. Let's be completely clear about that. But in a sense, it is a big milestone because Parliament did vote to say, yeah, this is a version of Brexit that we could look at, we could tweak or change. But there is a strong sign tonight, and some Tory MPs are cock a hoop, that the numbers could be there for this deal.
So if you look ahead, what is likely to happen in the next few weeks?
A huge problem, of course, is that although they had the tentative approval from MPs for the deal, Boris Johnson didn't get the timetable. And he just does not want to hang around. Now, he's pretty much had to break the promise of leaving at the end of this month. Number 10 is still saying tonight that now, if the European Union offers a delay, their preferred option will be, instead of carrying on with this Parliament, to try to get the country to settle this in a general election. But in a sense, irony upon ironies, it's not in their control. This depends what the European Union says next. If they push for a long delay, they agree what MPs have asked for, which is the end of January. Because remember, Boris Johnson's already had to ask for that delay. Then my sense is Number 10 will, as soon as they possibly can, get to the election. That's not what all of their MPs want in their own party. It's certainly not what all the opposition MPs want in their party. So it's not entirely in Boris Johnson's control.
OK, Laura, once again, thanks very much. Laura Kuenssberg for us there, our political editor, with a latest analysis on what's been going on in these votes. Well, Boris Johnson said that Parliament had been caught in a deadlock of its own making, and he would in no way allow months more of this, his words. But tonight it's by no means clear what might happen in the coming weeks and what steps the Prime Minister might take to push for the general election that Laura was talking about. Our Deputy Political Editor John Pienaar considers what might happen next.
Tonight, for a moment, for the first time, Boris Johnson came out a winner on Brexit. MPs who are keen to leave and some who aren't backed his plan. But the Commons demanded more time to debate it, and that may have wrecked his chances of leaving on schedule on October the 31st. What now? Deliver Brexit or hold a snap election? Or both? The next move's up to the EU. EU leaders will consider the extension request. They're being pressed by the PM tonight to decide. Offer a short delay, just enough to get the bill through Parliament, or a long delay, maybe months, long enough for Parliament to finally agree on Brexit, or change it, or choose or change the government. The Brexit bill's on hold while the EU decides, but big battles lie ahead on whether or not to seek another referendum, on whether to try to keep the UK inside the EU's customs union, bound to the EU on border taxes and on striking future trade deals, or free to make trade deals separately. A defeat on that alone could mean the PM pulls the Brexit bill. Then on extending the Brexit transition period for as long as it takes to strike a trade deal with the EU. Whatever happens, Boris Johnson's keen to hold the election, with a deal if he can, without one if he must. The offer of a long extension could easily be enough to tip the balance in favour of a snap election. He's still ahead in the polls for now, and he'll tell voters he's the true champion of Brexit, not Nigel Farage and his Brexit party. Jeremy Corbyn's keen to get out campaigning too, though many of his MPs would rather the election was delayed. People seemed keener on elections a century ago. This was the last time we had one in December 1910. We may just be heading for another one now, or a winter poll soon afterwards. Just now, no one's truly in charge of events, and tonight at Westminster, all eyes are fixed on Europe. John Pienaar, BBC News.
John Pienaar there with his analysis. Let's go live to Brussels tonight and our Europe editor Katya Adler. Katya, the Prime Minister suggesting that the ball was now in the EU's court. Is that what they think?
No, Hugh. Brussels rejects the idea that the ball is now in the EU's court. In fact, EU leaders are waiting to hear from Boris Johnson, to hear him explain the current situation in the UK and tell them what his next steps are going to be. First and foremost in EU circles, Hugh, there is relief that a Brexit deal has now been approved by Parliament. There's also an understanding here that MPs might want a bit more time to have a look at the detail and the legislation in detail, but there is a frustration too that the legislative process has now been halted. And there is a sense here that a new Brexit extension is all but inevitable. Don't expect EU leaders to rush to grant one tomorrow, though, for example. They will wait to hear from the Prime Minister first. But don't forget also that even if it was through gritted teeth, the Prime Minister has asked for a Brexit extension up until the 31st of January. So will the EU grant that time length? Well, they're aware that this is a very political decision. They're aware that people who might want to stay in the EU might want a longer extension in order to have a second referendum, perhaps, whereas those who leave might want no extension at all or just a very short one. The EU is keen to be neutral in this very domestic UK argument, and they think the most neutral thing they can do is simply grasp the time length, those 3 months that were requested in the Prime Minister's letter. But there is a lot of frustration behind closed doors here, Hugh. Frustration at the idea that EU leaders might have to come back here to Brussels for another emergency Brexit summit. There's talk that in fact they'll try and organise the extension in writing rather than in person. There's frustration that all of this Brexit process has already taken up so much EU time, and a suspicion that's often mentioned to me here in background talks, Hugh, that politicians in the UK are using the Brexit process to further their own political goals, and one of the names mentioned there is the Prime Minister's.
Katya, many thanks again. Katya Adler there for us, our Europe editor in Brussels. That's all from Westminster for now. Anyway, we'll be back later in the programme. Don't forget you can find more detail on today's Brexit news, including background and analysis from our editors, including Katya and Laura, on the BBC website.